that there were film houses where people were just paying for a ticket and wandering in for 6 hours.
Yeah. Like treating it like a pornographic theater or something.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Like, you know, crazy.
And you get one way to think. It changes your view of even things like New Hollywood, because I think one of the things you start thinking about New Hollywood is, okay, now we have this full canvas we can do, right? What does film look like with the full canvas? Yeah, right.
Wait.
Lightning in a bottle, Jim.
Boom. But no, and so we're doing 2 classics. Actually, one of the classics that we're doing, I'm Jim Groom, by the way. Who are you?
Yeah,
standing beside
I'm
me?
Mike Caulfield.
What's the name of this podcast?
The name of this podcast is Couch to 4K, I think.
And what do we believe? What is our belief?
What do we believe? We believe a lot of things. We believe that physical media can save the world.
Boom. Bingo.
I think
And I think you've come to believe over time that 2 movies are better than 1.
maybe we'll see. It's a lot to watch. It's a lot to do in a week, and usually I'm adding like a third movie too. So
exactly, you're like, I watched these 2 movies because we have to talk about it, but I'm watching these 6 satellite films because I think they're important. I'm like, Mike,
yeah.
I fucking have a job. I have a family. I can't keep up.
Yeah. Jim, I was going to say, like, just before we get to business here, I learned something
We're not
3
in
days ago.
I feel like this is business.
I learned something 3 days ago about you.
About me.
That I found kind of shocking.
All right.
Apparently, your hatred of Moonstruck is so intense that there is a buried podcast episode that can never see the light of day because the intensity of your viciousness towards this film was
Well, I'm going to tell you something. You're right. And I'm going to tell you something. Michael Branson Smith, we were doing our whole frame of the other podcast, his Family Pictures podcast, right? And so he's like, oh, great one's going to be Moonstruck. And I've hated Moonstruck since I saw it in the 80s. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go back to it. I'm going to try hard. And I went back to it and I freaking hated it even more. And so we had really congenial podcasts up until then. We were like, yeah, you see us. We're like all happy. He gets on and like he starts it. And then I start ripping the movie apart and like being mean. And he's like, what the fuck? What are you doing?
You're like the Joan Rivers of...
It was horrible.
You're like the Joan Rivers style commentary there.
It was really bad. Midway, I felt like uncomfortable how bad I was being. And I was like, this is something else. I got to go to a therapist. This can't be about Moonstruck. and then we finished the episode. And I think Michael at this point was probably having a question or two, like, maybe I don't want to do a podcast with Jim Groom anymore. And he got over that, thankfully. And we buried that episode. So the idea is that will never see the light of day public until I'm dead.
Well,
and then when I'm dead,
I'm not going to prod you. I think I think Moonstruck is
Moonlight's a good movie,
is delightful. But I'm not going to prod you on this because this is going to be a great podcast, and I don't want to have to bury it.
I want to find someone and to be a podcast partner who hates Moonstruck as much as me.
You could call it. This could just be a podcast about Moonstruck every week.
Just a minute of Moonstruck every week.
1 minute of Moonstruck. And, the person's like, what do you think? Cosmos Moon. What does that bring up in you, Jim? The whole thing about Cosmos Moon. All right. We're going to get on to Diabolique. What I'm going to do, I do not believe, we're not so focused on the spoiler thing here. We believe that really it's not really about what happens in a film, is about how it happens in a film, right? And so I am going to read Diabolique, the summary of Diabolique, provided here through AI, but we've seen it, so if any of this is wrong.
So spoiler alert.
Yes, spoiler alert.
What you were trying to say.
I don't think we'll do a summary of Psycho, because I really don't think we need to, but Diabolique, French thriller by Henry Georges Clouzot, is set at a rundown boys' boarding school outside of Paris. The school is owned by Christina de La Salle, a fragile woman with a serious heart condition, but it's run by her husband, Michel, a petty, sadistic tyrant.
Well said.
Who is having an affair with another teacher, Nicole Horner. In an odd arrangement, the wife and the mistress become allies and plot to kill him. Nicole persuades the reluctant religious Christina to help murder him. During a school holiday, they lure him to Nicole's apartment in a provincial town where they sedate him. They haul the body back to the school, dump it in the school's pool, planning for it to surface and look like a drunken accident, but the body never surfaces. When the pool is drained, it's empty. There's a variety of sort of things happen that seem like there's a ghostly apparition of the husband wandering around the town, a nosy retired police detective who has got to be a precedent for Columbo, and we got to talk about that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Attaches himself to the case. Christina, guilt-ridden, deteriorates under the strain of her weak heart, and finally, in a final scene, has a heart attack when Michel reappears as a ghost and steps out of the bathtub from which he was drowned. The famous twist is that he was never dead. Nicole and Michel staged Michel's drowning to create this whole gaslight situation to cause the death of Christina so that they could live happily ever after.
Interestingly enough, the first movie we had paired this with was Gaslight.
Yeah.
And I think you made a shift. And can you talk a little bit about your shifting away from Gaslight to now Psycho? Because they're two very different films in very different genres, if you will.
Yeah. So Gaslight is so this plot is really a couple plots in one. The first half of the plot is really like Double Indemnity, right? Like this is a noir. This is a noir about, two people going and trying to kill someone and getting away with it. And all of the beats in it are the beats of, are they going to notice that the wicker basket that we put the body in is leaking water, or that it's suspiciously heavy? They got to get it back. So all the beats are sort of these Double Indemnity beats. The second half of it is Gaslight, right? In this case, two people conspiring to have a woman believe, not that necessarily she's going insane, but that she's being haunted. But the interesting piece and the difference from Gaslight is an earlier film where we are in on the gaslighting by about a third into the film. By the end of the first act, really, we know what's going on. By the midpoint of the film, like, we're completely in on it. And the structure of Gaslight is really a how catch 'em, right? Which is like, we are watching in the 44 version, we are watching Ingrid Bergman deteriorate under the situation. She doesn't have much time before she's completely lost it. It's really kind of tragic because, Ingrid Bergman is such a sort of a massive figure, and you watch her mental deterioration over time. But the tension in that film is she going to deteriorate fully before someone figures this out and steps in to help, or before she figures it out? That's where the tension in the film comes from. In Lady Diabolique, the tension doesn't come from the gaslighting. That we don't know that the gaslighting is happening. I mean, we may suspect, but the imagined audience of the film does not know that the gaslighting is happening.
So who's being gaslit in this film?
Right. Well, I mean, so in this case,
audience.
the audience, and that's the reason why I wanted to do this is, as I looked at Lady Diabolique, and both in the academic literature and in my plot FYI tool, I realized this is actually the first major film to be built on a final ending plot twist. And that sounds so weird to say. Like what I would call a reassessment plot twist. That this device that is so common to us now, where at the end of the film something happens and we, the audience, realize we have misinterpreted everything in this film up until this point. Like, that had never happened in a major film that I can find before Lady Diabolique.
What about the Cabinet of Dr. Calagari?
So Cabinet of Dr. Calagari, when we are looking at it, we aren't looking at something like if you take the frame of Cabin to Dr. Calagari, and for the audience, it's told by a guy sitting on a bench, and he tells this fabulous story of this somnambulist who is involved in these murders and so forth. And at the end of it, you realize that this guy on the bench is from an insane asylum, and all the characters that have populated it are really from this insane asylum. And so everything you've seen on screen is a fiction, right? And you kind of have a similar like Wizard of Oz sort of thing, like she wakes up and so forth. And okay, but that's a different. That's a frame. And it's a different sort of frame than this. That frame says everything you've seen is a fiction. What this does, and what the modern ending, what the modern reassessment twist does in a plot, thriller plot today, and since this movie, is everything you saw on the screen was absolutely accurate. You just did not see it right, and that is fundamentally different. Hitchcock famously got burned. He tried to play around with this in 1950. He did a film called Stage Fright, which I watched as part of this too, because they branch out into 80 different movies.
There's another point.
A fascinating film, not one of Hitchcock's best. Have you ever seen this film? Very few people have. But in Stage Fright, a character is on the run from the police, wrongly accused of a crime. He goes and he tells a woman that he can trust, like what happened and how he got framed. And we have an extended 20-minute flashback of how he got framed. And then at the end of the film, he admits that what he told, that story that we watched with our own eyes for 20 minutes, was in fact a lie. And that he actually did commit the killing. And people crucified Hitchcock over it. People hated this because they felt it was a cheat, right?
Yeah. Totally.
And Hitchcock, Hitchcock has always been interested in this idea, right? But the people felt that this was an absolute cheat. Got very, very angry at Stage Fright, like swing and a miss from the master, but he kept on, I think, thinking about this idea. Hitchcock kept on thinking about this idea of how do we get to the end of a film and do this. And what Les Diaboliques does is it gives finally the recipe. You show everything exactly as it is, so that when the person at the end says this thing, you can go back to that movie and watch it exactly as it is, and that new frame fits exactly. And it's like a fascinating thing to have only come about in 1955, sort of brilliance, but in some ways it's not. The reason why it takes so long for this to come about is that people watched movies very differently back then. People used to just go to a movie and they would just walk into the middle of a film. And I don't know if people realize this, but it was very common practice up until the 60s to walk into a movie theater, walk into the middle of a film. Like, we're going to go see a movie. You walk into the middle of a film, you watch it to the end, then they loop it back, like they go to the front, and then you watch it up to the point you came in. And it's the reason why, like we talked last week, we talked about Crisscross has the final scene of Slim shooting Burt Lancaster on the movie poster. And it's like, that's the Crisscross. Like how do you have that on a movie poster? And the reason is people would walk in to a movie like 10 minutes before it ends, see the end, and then loop it back. Right. And so it wasn't as much the case in France, and maybe Clouseau had some advantage there. But in the U.S., it was just extremely common. People treated movies that way. Not everybody, but it made it really hard to build a movie that was based on a twist, right? Clouseau actually asked that people enter the film and see the film in its entirety in the trailer of his film. And then people, and so in the trailer, if you watch the trailer on the Criterion thing, it says, hey, please come at the beginning of the film. You really need to see this in its entirety. And the thing is that became a draw. When people saw that trailer, they're like, actually, I want to see a movie like that, right? Where you have to see it.
This is an event, right?
And I think the films, like why it only emerged in the 50s, and this is one of the things people always say, oh, well, the conspiracy thrillers came about in the 70s because everybody was suspicious. And I actually think never reach for that explanation first. Always reach for the structural explanation about what the market was, right? Because I think that's always the place you reach first. And I think one of the things that was going on was that audience that would watch a film in that way, like just wander into the middle and like, and then, the phrase, "This is where we came in." I don't know if you know this, that comes from the movies. Like you would watch the movie to the end and then you would watch it to where you came in. And then you would say to your partner, "Yeah, I think this is where we came in." And then you leave the movie, right? That audience is your TV audience now. They're not coming to the movie anymore, right? They just want something to kind of like occupy their eyes for a little bit. They're staying home. You're not going to get them. You got to go after. So I think the plot twist, I would say, is in the same range as things like CinemaScope, as things like 3D, as all of these things that the theaters are trying to do in the 50s to say, look, okay, what makes a movie different than just turning on your TV and watching I Love Lucy, right? What makes a movie different? And one of the things that Clouseau happens on this in this way, the reassessment twist, but it's one of the multiple ways where people are trying to say this is what makes a film different. So that's why I got interested in this, because Psycho is the film that solidifies that. Hitchcock sees this, is absolutely, his next two films are in, not his next two films, because he actually has some stuff in the pipeline, but his two biggest films in his career were done particularly because he felt he had been usurped by Clouseau. Both Vertigo and Psycho are absolutely direct responses to Les Diaboliques, where he's like, this guy got there first and it's fucking killing me. And
supposedly on Vertigo, they watched Les Diaboliques like regularly during the filming.
Yeah. So, and then Hitchcock, when Hitchcock comes in with Psycho, I think Psycho is underrated. We think of Psycho as the genesis of a bunch of things, but a big piece of what Psycho did is it said, look, the movie-going thing is going to be an experience. It's going to actually be more like what a play was, where you go, you come down, you sit down, you watch the play, right? It's an event, right? It's not just turning on your tap water and seeing what comes out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I came to this podcast really thinking about, okay, I knew you had a take on Diabolique, and I have a take on Psycho, right? And one of the things, as I was thinking about it, it's like one of the things I really didn't like about Diabolique and really bothered me about it was the fact that I felt I was being lied to the whole film. Like I almost felt like the people in stage, like back, what was the one?
Yeah.
I felt like that. Like I felt like, okay, it seemed so great when they were pushing this guy into the bathtub, and it looked like he was sitting there like dead, and you're like, oh my God, this is horrific. And these two are coming together and all of that. But once all of that is undone by learning that essentially, this was they were plotting together against his wife, who the best scene in the movie for me is when she dies. She's like, ah, like that's the best. But like, I was like, oh my God, you just undid all the things that I thought were great about this movie. And it was hard for me to it's how I feel about Shyamalama Ding Dong, right?
Yeah.
The whole Shyamalama films. Like, I don't like films that depend so structurally on that twist.
Well, it's such a, I mean, people, like a more recent example of that is Sinners, right? And I had that reaction to Sinners, right? My reaction to Sinners, like some people went to Sinners and they're like, oh, this is a horrible movie. This is being overhyped. Some people went and said, this is the most amazing thing ever. It's immediately in the canon. Like I think I had your same reaction to Sinners in that I watched Sinners, in the first half of Sinners, I was so attached to that first half of the movie. Like, and I think some people weren't as attached to that first half, but for me, that first half of the movie of Sinners, where you just feel the excitement of, you know what, we're building something new here, right? We're building something new. The old is behind us. Like everything is coming together. Like, just that feeling. It captured that feeling so well for me that when we went to the second half, I felt
Dusk to
betrayed.
Dawn.
But Dusk to Dawn is different because actually I wasn't very attached to the first half of Dusk to Dawn. It's
It wasn't attached to Dusk to Dawn at all.
Second
half.
It's like, okay, make it I mean, now at least we got Salma Hayek in it. So like things are looking up.
I guess like I feel the same way. I didn't like Dusk to Dawn, and when the Sinners went that route, I was like, what? I don't disagree with you there.
That said, I do like Lady Diabolique. Now it may be partially that I came into it. The reason why I watched this film, I didn't know about this film, and I'm shocked that people don't understand, like, don't know about a film that I think is so central to what we now see as film. The reason I found it is I was doing plot FYI, and I just watched Gaslight, and a couple films came up. One was the Sydney Sweeney Housemaid one.
Housemaid, yeah, that's great.
One was that. Park, what is the other one that's essentially like a housemaiden, I think, or something like that. The Park, the Korean film.
Oh my God, that one is amazing, and I think it's called like Maid or The Maid.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that thing is amazing.
Yeah, but that is also like, this is spoiler. This is like,
we're getting ahead.
We should change this podcast to just we spoil movies. I think that would be a great.
You're full of good ideas. I'm liking this.
But but I mean, we could go on and on and on. I mean, there's a wave of these things after this. There's Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which I also watched last week.
Jesus, you're out of control. The 1960 Korean film, just to be clear, is called The Housemaid too.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, but What Happened to Baby Jane, I've never seen.
Yeah, I won't spoil that for you, but
spoil it. Come on.
Come on, bring it.
I dare you to spoil it for me.
So what happens with this is that people realize. I mean, I think we could look at it.
Let's look at it though, because I'm interested in this, and it's going back to what you said about Hitchcock, because I was really fascinated not only with the fact he didn't get the novel, and like he really wanted to do this, and there was a sense of him feeling like, I was burned and I'm the master. I'm going back. But with Psycho, and we talked about this on the, Family Pictures podcast, like he went full indie. He had a TV crew. It was all black. He basically was like, I'm independent filmmaking. It's the 90s again. And here I am at the center of it. The thing that's interesting to me, and I'm kind of fascinated, is he learned from stage fright, because Psycho's not a lie. And he never lies in the same way. And a lie is maybe strong. And I think you can argue that. And I like Diabolique. It's not like I didn't like the movie. I see its genius and I'm there, right? But Hitchcock actually takes it a step further, because it's not about the plot twist with the mom at all. It's about just what a fucked up character Norman Bates is.
It is. Oh, so part of what you're reacting to, I think so first of all, do you like Lady Diabolique?
I liked it. Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was a great movie.
Yeah. But
I don't like that end of the movie thing. It makes me think of Shyamalama, who I don't like. So like I get into that. But anyway, we'll go back to Diabolique.
And I actually do like the original title too, Lady Diabolique, because in a lot of people in the US call it Diabolique. The original title
is actually a Mario Bava movie.
So you
got to be careful.
But also, Lady Diabolique is a funny title because when you know the ending, it hits different. Lady Diabolique can be seen as like the fiendish, but it can also be read as the devils. And the devils, plural, is interesting because the idea that there's two devils is like in the beginning of the film, it's Christina and Nicole. And then you realize, no, all the time, the title has actually been talking about the devils being, Michelle and Nicole. But yeah, back to your point about Psycho. Yeah, he does. I mean, Psycho is in no way just a copy of Diabolique. He definitely is powered to say, like, how can I take this and go a step further? He does have the reassessment twist. I think, I mean, absolutely, the fact that he tells people to conceal it, right?
Yeah.
Means that twist
Exactly.
is important, right? That twist about Norman Bates being the mother is important. As a matter of fact, I watched this a third time last night with my daughter who had never seen Psycho and actually had avoided almost everything, knowing anything about Psycho at all, which was fascinating because she's watching this film and I'm seeing her react to it. And like when at first she's with Janet Leigh, she's like, and Janet Leigh takes the money and it's like, okay, so is she the psycho? She's not the psycho.
She does
She's
seem like
not the
that's
psycho.
what I love about
And then the
her.
cop is following her and she's like, he's the psycho, right? He's going to be the psycho, you know? And so we're watching this and I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. Cause we grew up in a world so saturated like this. It's with Psycho, it's hard for us to have come to that fresh, but like I was able to see it through her eyes. Like the film is named Psycho and then you are waiting to figure out who I'm sorry about the disparaging term psycho, but like that's you're waiting to see
Name of the movie.
who is named who is the named psycho in the movie. Like that's right there in the title, and that is the question that the movie poses for you. But of course Hitchcock does another thing, which is like 43% into this movie, and I threw it up to see it's not at the exact midpoint, which is interesting. Midpoint reveals have a history, like the midpoint reveal of The Third Man, where suddenly like Orson Welles is alive, right smack in the middle of the movie, and now the second half of the movie is like who was Harry Lime and what is Harry Lime doing, right? Like, but this happens earlier. It hits earlier. She's murdered, and the story that we have fully invested in is gone. And like that's interesting too, because I could see someone having your reaction to that. Like they're invested in this story because it's a pretty good story about her, you know?
And to your point, I mean, they are getting rid of a major character. Like Clouseau does that really, really early in Les Diabolique, forgive me for that. And that's that main character who you're kind of thrilled to watch swallow it, telling her to swallow the
that scene is something else.
He is just a fiend, if you will.
Yeah.
And then he's gone.
Yeah.
And for the rest of the film, like it's just covering that up and you're missing him. And I think the same is like Janet Leigh is the best part of Psycho in many ways. Like her early in the room, in her bra, getting outside of a relationship and talking about that, stealing the money. I mean,
even the way where like when Norman Bates is talking and says, I think we all go a little mad sometimes. Doesn't mean we're bad people. And her face as she watches that and then says, yeah, I think that's true. And the level of, my wife and I always jokingly call this face acting, but like a person who can like with just very, very subtle movements of their face, like tell a whole story. And she's telling the whole story there. She's telling the whole story of her reacting to this, her coming to terms, the way she goes back to the room in the way that she, does the sums on the money.
I mean, and part of my one of my favorite scenes in that whole movie, Psycho, and that's why it's interesting because even though Clouseau, like you put him up there and you do that, like then you take Psycho by Hitchcock and it's like, that's why he's the master. Like she's driving and thinking in this internal monologue about all that. Did he see me? What happened here? I'm going to bring, like, you get elements of these characters that because of the way the plot structure works in Clouseau, you're completely outside of that.
Clouseau,
and you have to be because it's a box premised on a con. Yeah. And I don't think that's at all the case with Psycho.
That's not entirely true. I think there's also just a different tradition at work here. And like, if you've seen Wages of Fear, you kind of see this too, right? Like Clouseau is coming from a detailed realism perspective, right? Where we are meant to be divorced from the internal psychology of these characters. He's intensely interested in the psychology of characters. What holds his work together, I've only seen Wages of Fear in this, but if you look, what holds Wages of Fear in this together is that he's intensely interested in the psychology of characters, right? But he wants to do that from a detailed realism sort of style where he stands back and he records it. And I think that can be a strength in some ways. I mean, I think it's an approach, but I think it can also be a weakness. I mean, what I will say is like,
I mean, it becomes a weakness because of the very thing you say he brought to film, right? Is you have the surprise ending and the twist. And because of the twist, how much can you give away about, one of the greatest characters in the film, Simone Signoret?
Simone,
it's just amazing. Just looking at her is amazing. Her dresses are amazing.
Yeah.
Her face is amazing. But she has to play it close because she's in on the con. You know what I mean? And I think that's cool too. Like, I'm not discounting that. But like with Psycho, it's just like, with Janet Leigh and with
you
Anthony Perkins, it's all out there.
Well, one of the things you get too is you get in Psycho. So Clouseau decides to do his whole film without any music other than the intro music and the outro. I don't know if you know, there's no soundtrack to any of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did notice
this again, something that he kind of developed. It's not like it wasn't like a thing in French film not to do that or whatever. It's just this is the way he liked to do his films, right? Clinical, right?
Yeah.
And then on Psycho, you've got what is regarded by many people to be perhaps the greatest movie score of all time, right? Like, and it's not just the famous, those famous tight notes on the shower scene, but it's as Janet Leigh's driving.
That's
right.
Really my favorite.
That's coming up and you're in the psychology of these characters. You're in it. You're not looking at them. Right. Clouseau's approach. And again, I'm not sure that it's like one right way or one wrong way, but even the school for Clouseau is like a diorama where he is the scientist looking into it.
That's
and
true.
we honestly have shots where like there's the big window and you're kind of watching through the window and it's like, this is a science project, right? And he does that, I think he does it effectively in both movies. But I think his more effective use of this detailed realism is probably Wages of Fear, which is the greater of the two movies.
Yeah.
But Wages of Fear, he's able to be completely distant from these characters, treating this as if it was a documentary. It feels like a documentary. And yet we become so invested in these characters and so drawn into their descent, particularly into the descent of Yves Montand, that it's almost like when it works, right? When you're able to strip off everything from a film, strip the score off, make the dialogue very dry, right? Reduce the number of cuts. He's different from Hitchcock is the sort of the master of the cuts, and Clouseau is actually doing these deep focus scenes, right? He's kind of doing the William Wyler thing, right? You'll have a scene and you'll have it set up in a given way with one character in the foreground, one character in the background, and then we'll move the camera and positions will shift and we'll get to another scene without a cut. So everywhere he's trying to do that documentary piece of it. And of course, that's not the Hitchcock approach to things.
But the Psycho for some does have like a true crime element to it.
It does have a true crime. And I think he pulled that. I think he pulled that from Clouseau. And I think he pulled that from Clouseau and I think he dressed it up a bit. I do think if you look at Psycho and you look at, I mean, obviously the films before were his big sort of Hollywood tentpole productions, right? Like these were, it was kind of at the height of things. But even if you look at something like Shadow of a Doubt or like one of the earlier Hitchcock films, Shadow of a Doubt is not filmed in that documentary way. We're kind of very much, in this. And I think he does pull that Clouseau's documentary element.
Yeah.
And then he dresses it up. I mean, gets Bernard Herrmann to do the. I
can totally see that. And I mean, I think it's interesting just Clouseau's coming off what people argue are his greatest film.
Yeah.
Right. And then he goes in and he makes what people can argue pretty easily is his most impactful film. And this is what I've loved about watching all these movies and talking about them. It's like, I'm always like, Ground Zero, Psycho for modern horror. It changes everything. And then you're like, well, actually, Clouseau, like, and I love that because, like, I like big, overstated, exaggerating. It's like saying shit, but like it never works that easy. It's never that clean. And I even hadn't seen my story about La Diabolique is interesting. So I was in probably 1992, 1993. I was living in Los Angeles, and there was a great theater in Los Angeles called the New Art Theater. And it was not that far from where I lived. It was like 5 blocks, but they were LA blocks, so they were big. But anyway, you could get there pretty easily with a bus or a car. And I would go all the time and see things like Spider Baby and all these other weird films. But one of the things they kept on doing is they kept having coming attraction for Les Diaboliques, and they were actually re-releasing it. And I think in the early 90s is when people started to reevaluate that film and basically say, like, you know what? This is probably a much bigger and more important film than it has been given credit for. And I think that was the beginning of the reevaluation of that film. I just by circumstance never saw it, and I didn't see it until yesterday when I watched it for this podcast. And it is a great film, and I understand all that, but I kind of got into the weeds of like it versus Psycho, right?
Shots fired.
No, but it's even better when you talk about stage fright.
Yeah.
Because it's like Hitchcock went down that road before. He realized the pratfalls of potentially what, Clouseau was going to do.
Yeah.
And so in kind of
And Clouseau
Psycho, he redid it.
From the reaction, regardless of like what our reactions are here, you can see from the reaction to Diabolique, which was absolutely that it was a sensation. It was the Sinners of its time, or even bigger, right? It was a movie that everybody was talking about. You can see from the reaction that he stuck the landing, and Hitchcock knew he stuck the landing. And the thing people kept on saying was that Clouseau had out-Hitchcocked Hitchcock. And that was a nice phrase that kept popping up. He had out-Hitchcocked Hitchcock. And the truth is, to what we've talked about here, after Psycho, no one said that. After Vertigo did not land, right? Vertigo did not land. It's now considered to be one of his greatest films. At the time, not a particularly popular success, and not a critical success either, partially because I think at the time, people, a big piece of it, I think at the time, people had certain feelings about Jimmy Stewart and that we don't have at that level. And we can now watch that with Jimmy Stewart in it, and it feels a little less violative towards our feelings. And a couple other things, too. It's just a brutal film.
It is a brutal film. And it goes on a little long.
It goes on long. The
obsession of what he's filming becomes part of the film.
Yeah.
So that you can feel that obsession in the film. And I think that's probably why it has such a great, but I could imagine going to the theater and being like, what's up with following this woman all over the place?
There are films that go slower on a second viewing. There's films that go faster, and Vertigo is a film that goes faster on a second viewing.
I agree.
But on a first viewing, it is slow because you don't fully understand where he's going with it. The second viewing through Vertigo, to your point, you understand that the slowness of it is the slowness of the obsession. It's that sort of just the sort of depth and murkiness and gravity of it. And the idea of the slow obsession like really hits the second time. But the first is sort of like, like there is a point, like when I was watching it like last year, and I again, after doing a long time, there was, there's always a point with some films where you hit that status button and you're like, how long?
Exactly. How much time do I have left?
Yeah. And I did that. I did that with Vertigo the first time. You don't do that with it the second time. It feels faster the second time.
I agree. And you're kind of stunned by just the visuals, and
you're stunned by the visuals. And also that slow build is part of the beauty of it. But yeah, people didn't feel that. So he didn't undo that with this. But when Psycho came out, the talk about Clouseau disappeared for two reasons. The first reason is, and I think this is kind of unfortunate, is the new wave came in, Nouvelle Vague came in, and they wanted nothing to do with this guy. This guy was the old guy. He hung out with Sartre and whatever. He was a good friend with Sartre and so forth. But like,
and even that can't get you street cred. Come on, France is a hard
but that
place.
couldn't get him street cred. It was just mainly he was thought of as the old guard there. He'd gone back. He'd been producing. He kind of, his great movies are in the late 40s and 50s, but he goes back. He's doing work all the way back to the late 30s. So he's just old. And of course, when you come in and you're a brash filmmaker, you're always talking about how you're going to overthrow the people that just came before you. And so the new wave was very successful. Not just as filmmakers, but I mean, just as marketers of their product. They were incredibly successful as presenting themselves as people that were kind of taking out the trash, and he kind of got buried under that. And of course, the new wave becomes such a fixture in U.S. film programs, right? As like the people that came along and saved film, that you get the perspective of Clouseau, if you get it at all, through them, right?
So, and then the other piece here, and I'd be interested how this ties into some of the kind of William Castle research and watching it is.
Research.
So that means also, right? Like watching a film by him is research. But I mean, if Hitchcock,
so not as bad as people say, by the way.
You could make an argument though, then that Hitchcock is like the greatest of the self-publicists and reinventors, and that's actually almost documented. All his commercials, he's in them, he's in all his movies. Like he became an icon of himself. But like you're suggesting that with Psycho, he had something to prove finally.
He has something to prove. And people also talk about he's looking at these low budget films that had kind of exploded, and like, what if we added money in Psycho as part of and he's talking about William Castle, and that's our other piece of this is William Castle goes into a theater on a rainy night and sees Lady Diabolique, and he had up until that point produced a bunch of just sort of productions level stuff, and none of it was horror, not a single horror thing in there. And he was just one of these people that just, churned along and did these not like B films, right? Really, but just did did the stuff at the lower tier of what Hollywood did. And he sees Lady Diabolique, and he sees the reaction of the audience at the end of it, and he says, "That's what I'm doing." And he goes and he mortgages his house to make a movie called Macabre, which I saw for research. Now, Macabre is a film where we follow a doctor who is told that his daughter is in a coffin and has only like 8 hours of air or some level of hours of air. And he has to find her before the air runs out. And we follow the doctor around. And then the question is, who is doing this to the doctor? And at the very end of the film, we learn that the doctor has constructed all of this to give his father-in-law a heart attack so that he can inherit the money from the father-in-law. And it's actually a solidly made film, I got to say. It's not like, I'm not recommending the film.
So did he insure film goers, theater goers, $1,000 against death by Fright?
So he does a couple things with this film. The first thing is he sees the end of Diabolique, and at the end of Diabolique, they have a thing that says, like, don't be you may have seen this. Don't be a devil. Do not tell your friends about this.
So good.
And so the first thing is the idea, and this was the warning was not new at the end. Like, I actually found an instance from a movie called, I think it was The Bat, from 1926 or something. It's like a silent film. Has exactly the same warning at the end. Don't tell your friends about this ending. But the idea that this could be the marketing for the movie, that was the thing, right? Like, to run around and say, like, and this is something that starts with Clouseau in his trailer. He's like, come in before, and so Hitchcock takes that, and then he says, look, you have to come to the film from the start, which follows the Clouseau thing. And so Hitchcock takes this, and Hitchcock actually, for Psycho, says that no one will be admitted after the movie starts. And this comes back to this is where I came in thing, is like, we will not let you in. And in certain cities, literally, and this is documented, literally puts people from Pinkerton, like the Pinkerton Detective Agency.
Yeah, totally.
Like security agents outside. I mean, to create a spectacle, right? It's not like every theater, but at certain theaters puts Pinkerton agents outside at the door, right? To make sure that no one is allowed to enter after it, right? Like kind of like takes it up, right? But that idea again, like coming back to it, is it, I always think the structural questions of the audience are the pieces that you go to first before you go to what does this plot tell us about the culture? Because again, the idea is you're competing with TV now, right? And so you've got to make the movie an event. So Hitchcock is not only seeing a plot device that would be made possible if people really watched the movie from start to end. He's also seeing that if you can tell people this movie can only be consumed from start to end, that this is an event. This is an event. And Castle is doing that in 1958 with Macabre, and he's coming up with other things. He has like the Coward's Corner, which I think is great. Like there's a part in the lobby that's roped off. That's the Coward's Corner. But I actually had a thread of all the things. It wasn't just Hitchcock doing this. You see it in the advertising for Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, like that you cannot tell this, and people will not be admitted after the beginning. It has to be watched in full. And this whole idea of we have to watch the movie from start to end. I think there's actually a line in Annie Hall that I never got where Woody Allen's like, I'm a person who has to watch a movie from start to end. And you think, oh, he's talking about like cable TV or something like that. And he's talking about like the experience of growing up in that time, which is a lot of people just wander into a movie in the middle and they're like, oh, well, I'll just catch the beginning later. And so this idea of the movie as an event, kind of, this is the birth of that.
It's interesting too, and this brings me back because at 58, you have William Castle doing Macabre in 58, and it's kind of an early, right? I mean, exploitation movie, if you will. So my son comes back the other day, and he's hanging out with his kind of new group of people, and they all watch movies. And he comes back to me, and he's like 16. He's like, Dad, what's an exploitation movie? I'm like, oh, wait, this is a weird question to be asking me, right? And so I have a couple on hand, and I take out Herschel Gordon Lewis's 2000 Maniacs and talk about exploitation and the whole idea of the South to North and exploiting all that. But it's interesting because I wonder also, as you're talking about this, that made a whole market for what before wasn't a market. Right? You couldn't see that on tape. They wouldn't let you. They would never put it on TV.
Yeah.
So this whole gore and exploitation and all the stuff that comes up through VHS and beyond is actually also a response to that changing economic moment, whether it's movies competing with TV or movies competing with the VCR or movies competing with X, Y, and Z. It's super interesting to me, but like, I was trying to describe to him, okay, an exploitation movie. Have you seen Spit on My Grave? Oh, no. Have you seen this? And of course he hasn't seen Spit on My Grave, but
you need to think about, like, when you think about, like, how is someone watching a movie and how does the director want them to watch the movie and that battle? One of the things that helped, like, so drive-in movies created a culture where you had to create a thrill a minute, because you were dealing with the most distracted audience ever, Like if you lost their attention for a minute, I mean, they were there with their date in a car, you know what I mean? Like there were other things they could be doing. So like, you're really competing for their attention. And so you get to this thing where you're making these movies that are much denser, right? Much denser in terms of things happening than movies previously, right? And then when you get to the multiplex era, it turns out that if you create a movie that is just much denser with these things, that people might come back and pay again to see Jaws, right? Because there's just a whole bunch of stuff that goes by very fast and you feel like you might want to see it again. And that, boosts movie tickets. But the other thing I started thinking about with Psycho really Clouseau opening this door and Psycho really permanently nailing it open, right? Is now you have a culture where people are watching films in whole. And Hitchcock, not only, the other thing that Hitchcock did was actually very specific and helped was that some movie theaters announced their specific start times for movies. A lot of theaters at that time still did not. They would say, we start the showings of this movie at 1:15 in the afternoon, and we continue for the last full showing will be at like 9. And what they meant by that is we'd have the last full showing, and then we'll run whatever we can of the movie up until
It's
close.
so interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like that idea of format dictating so many things, right? Or even I wouldn't even be format as much would just be like presentation and programming, right? Like, there was no expectation. And think about that, what that meant for film culture. It meant that there were film houses where people were just paying for a ticket and wandering in for 6 hours.
Yeah. Like treating it like a pornographic theater or something, you know what I mean?
Like, crazy.
And you get one way to think, it changes your view of even things like New Hollywood. Because I think one of the things you start thinking about New Hollywood is, okay, now we have this full canvas we can do, right? What does film look like with the full canvas, right? What does film look like when it's an event? What does film look like when you're watching it start to end? What does film look like when you don't, like, one of the things that people hate about it takes a while to get used to watching old movies. I mean, everybody knows this. One of the reasons why is that they're so redundant with information, right? And we've generally thought, oh, well, people just weren't as movie literate at that time, right? That's always been my assumption is, oh, they have to tell us this 8 times because people back then didn't know what a movie was. And like, maybe that's piece of it. But maybe the other piece of it is you as a writer don't know when they walked in the door, right? So you are going to have that character recap for the audience multiple times why they're doing what they're doing, right? And then suddenly in 1970, you don't, right? You don't, right?
Yeah.
And so the shifting of this, I think, is interesting in that way. And it also kind of relates to this current debate that we're having about people on their phones watching Netflix. There was a thing where Matt Damon was talking about a meeting he had with Netflix people, and they're like, well, you got to say things multiple times because people are on their phones, and they might not catch it the first time because they're watching Netflix. They're kind of
interesting
scrolling stuff.
So going back to that model.
It's kind of going back to that, right? And so it's almost like, I think we have a view of the past that assumes that the world that you and I grew up in is the old world, right? And that it existed from the point we were born back to the beginning of time, and that now it's going to something entirely different. But it might also be that you and I grew up in a world that was really fundamentally different than what came before or after. And we're the freaks.
That's probably true to some degree because we grew up in the VHS age.
Oh,
and
that's true.
It was like honest to goodness anxiety amongst theater houses in your neighborhood. People telling, I would go there like, we're not can't compete with the VHS. And then
the VHS thing is really interesting. So Kim Newman is on the Criterion release. He's a film scholar of the precisely this sort of thing, these plot twisty movies. And one of the things he points out is that the Clouseau got what he did from the book that was written by these two people. The book actually initially had it was a lesbian relationship between
which you can kind of see in the movie.
Kind of see, right? But they couldn't do it in the movie. But the bigger thing is that the book is written in this way, right? Where you can then read the book. And one of the things that Kim Newman said is the thing that mystery novels gave filmmakers once they latched onto this was mystery novels already had 30 years of people picking apart every mistake you make if you do this, right? So you do this, and you can go back to Murder of Roger Ackroyd or Then They Were None and so forth. You can do this, but every mistake that you made would be picked apart by a fandom. And so mystery writers got really tight with what they did, and they got used to having to be really tight. And what Kim Newman said is directors initially, the directors that they had didn't like having to be that tight, right? They didn't like having to be thinking of every scene. Okay, well, wait, if I have her going over to this, and I think back to this, like, does that actually work if a person's watching this again? Like that, like most directors will look at that and say, like, I have enough I have enough trouble making the movie forward once, right? I'm not going to think about what it looks like on a second viewing. But because novels you could kind of go back and forth in the pages, like you get to the end of a novel, right? And you're like, well, hold on, wait a second.
Yeah.
And you can flip back and say, actually, on page 34, you have this character say this. And if this is really true at the end, they couldn't possibly know that. That doesn't exist in film until the VHS era, right?
Yeah, good
like
point.
we don't actually, or until people start really buying these multiple tickets, I guess, at the multiplex. But for the most part, that like the printed culture was used to having to have that tightness, and directors initially did not want to have to work that tightly because it is constraining. It is constraining to ask yourself, okay, if I watch The Sixth Sense over again, I know your feelings about this, but if I watch The Sixth Sense over again, like, does every scene still hit? Right? That was not something that most directors in the 40s and 50s wanted to think about at all. Right.
No,
but now it's a piece of it. Now it's a point of pride, right? Now it's a point of pride. Now it is part of being a director, is doing everything and having someone particularly look through all this stuff.
Other piece, I mean, I probably don't want to drag this on because it's a good time and actually probably pretty good place to stop. But in the future, one of the things the Clouseau movie, Les Diaboliques, made me think about is the whole kind of what came out in Italy and stuff. And, Italy dealt all with the kind of changes of VHS and the gore.
Yeah.
But the one they really held on to, and it was kind of a genre that they loved, was the Giallo.
Yeah.
And the Giallo really starts to get into that space where Diabolique is like the idea
Bird with crystal plumage is like exactly this, right? And we even see these scenes repeated. That's going to be the scene that's recontextualized at the end.
Exactly. Yeah. So like
Yeah.
all of those Italian directors are really picking up on that. And that is Bava in the 60s, then Argento in the 70s. So there's a really interesting lineage there. I mean, it is a really interesting point to start from. And I think that's why I did love the Clouseau, but then I was trying to manage it against Hitchcock. And, Hitchcock is just like, I go back to Psycho, and every time I watch Psycho, I see something else.
Yeah.
I've only watched Diabolique once, though. So that's unfair. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, you should. I mean, you watch it again. I'll say one thing about watching it with my daughter too is the part that there's an interesting story about Hitchcock and Psycho, which is, okay, so he's spending the first 43% of the movie building the story with Janet Leigh, and then he's kind of throwing that away, right? And he knows you have to transfer to the second story, right? And you have to kind of got to be in Norman Bates's position. You have to have some sympathy with it. You're not quite sure if you want him caught. You're not quite sure, like you got to be a little ambivalent about that as you watch it. And Hitchcock said that he had one thing that he was looking for at the screening to see if the audience had made the transfer. And that is, after Janet Leigh is murdered, there's like a 9-minute cleanup, by the way, in that film. Just like,
Same.
It's just like Bates Motel, Marie Kondo. But then he goes with the car, right? And he goes with the car, and he explicitly has a point where the car is sinking and the car stops. And he said, if the audience laughs at that point, I've got him. And he goes to the first screening and the audience laughs, like a nervous giggle, right? Like,
he made it. He got away with it.
Okay, now they're in the new story. They're in the new story. I've got him.
And they're identifying with Psycho.
They're identifying with the Psycho. And like, I'm watching it with my daughter, and the car sinks and it stops and she laughs, and it was so great to like be like that, like, yes, like we are distant from these audiences in this way, in that way, but at some level of art, right? At some level of art, it transcends, and it really does. That little trick he put in there explicitly to get the audience to really buckle down and be like, hey, now we're with this Bates guy. That little trick he put in there all those years ago, like 1960, like still works like all these years later. And I just think it's an amazing thing.
Read a testament to the master.
I think that's the end of our podcast.
Absolutely. I think we did damn good. I give us 10 out of 10. A++. Would listen again.
Yeah. I think it helps that, like, I've learned that I am horrible at doing the beats of a movie, and that, like, I think we just have to read the plot of the movie at the beginning, and because I'm ADHD, and no amount of Ritalin. Like, I listen to your other podcast, and Michael Branson Smith. First of all, I always have to say the dulcet tones of Michael Branson Smith. But
he's great.
Like, he's great at going through the beats.
Yeah, he keeps me under control, because he's like, you're gonna go anywhere the wind blows you because you have no structure in your life, and I'm like, you're right. So he keeps that under control. But me and you can be unmoored ships together.
We can be unmoored ships, but we've got to probably just tell people what the movie. We got to remember to tell people what the movie is at the beginning, and we probably got to just do a little thing. But anyway.
We clean up nice though, people.
I'll just say just briefly on the physical. It's a great physical release of Les Diabolique from Criterion. You get
my God, you're giving Criterion some love.
The thing Criterion always does well is they'll do the video essays.
They're great. Yeah, their
commentaries,
the video
essays are usually worth much more than the commentary tracks, in my opinion. And they're all good video essays on that one. The Psycho one, I just got a Blu-ray that was just a normal Blu-ray, but it looks great. And one of the things I'll say about Psycho is, and my daughter commented on this too, is it's such a crisp looking black and white film. I mean, part of it is they're using their TV crew, and they've got a certain style they developed, but it's so it's a really fine grained look on the black and white compared to other black and white films that people might be used to seeing, and it looks beautiful on a newer system.
Scene with Janet Leigh in the hotel room, with her lover, is just so gorgeous.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and I always think about, I don't know, it was some commentary with the person who made Blow Up.
Brian De
Palma, right? And he says, why would you waste the first minute of your film, like, panning around the city? And then Hitchcock in Psycho does exactly that. He pans around the city, but then goes into a window. Yeah. But it's
they're doing the Naked City Has a Million Stories thing, the same sort of thing we did. Was it Crisscross we saw that in recently? I think we saw that in
Crisscross, absolutely, on LA. Anytime I see any film opening on the city, I only hear Brian De Palma's voice in my head saying, you have such little time in the film. Why would you waste it with a pan of a city?
Yeah.
It was great.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week with some more Couch to 4K.